I watched the building inspector's face turn red as he flipped through the photographs on his tablet, each one showing another code violation at the Riverside Commons project. My stepbrother Marcus stood beside me in the trailer office, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Miss Chen," the inspector said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This is your license on file for this project. That makes you the responsible party for every single one of these violations." My stomach dropped even though I'd known this moment was coming, even though I'd lived through it before. "But I didn't," I started. "Unlicensed electrical work, substandard foundation inspection records, missing permits for the structural modifications on the 3rd floor, load-bearing walls removed without proper engineering oversight." He looked up from the tablet, his eyes hard. "Do you understand the liability here? People could have died." Marcus finally spoke up, his voice smooth and practiced. "Sir, there's clearly been some kind of administrative error. My sister has been away consulting on another project. I've been handling the day-to-day here." The inspector's expression didn't change. "Then who's the licensed contractor of record for this site?" "That would be Lily," Marcus said, gesturing to me with a helpless shrug. "She's the one with the license." I felt the rage building in my chest, the same rage I'd felt in my previous life when this exact scene had played out 3 years ago. But this time, I knew what was coming. This time, I'd made very different choices. "The State Licensing Board will be conducting a full investigation," the inspector said, pulling out an official-looking document. "As of this moment, work on this site is suspended. Ms. Chen, your contractor's license is hereby flagged for review pending the outcome of the investigation." He handed me the suspension notice. My hands shook as I took it, not from fear, but from the effort of containing my smile. Because this time, I'd made sure Marcus's fall would be so much harder than mine. 3 months earlier, I'd woken up in my childhood bedroom on my 23rd birthday, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that I'd put up when I was 12. My heart had been pounding, my mind reeling with memories that shouldn't exist yet. I died at 35. I remembered it with crystal clarity, the moment the doctors had told me there was nothing more they could do. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, discovered too late. I'd spent my last days in a hospital bed, broke and alone, thinking about all the ways my life had gone wrong. And every wrong turn had started with my family. In my previous life, I'd spent the next 12 years after this birthday being used, manipulated and discarded by my stepmother Helen and her son Marcus. This birthday, my 23rd, was when I'd graduated from state with a degree in construction management and passed my contractor's licensing exam on the first try. It was supposed to be the beginning of my success story. Instead, it had been the beginning of my destruction. I sat up in bed, so looking around the small room that Helen had always insisted was more than adequate for me while Marcus got the master suite on the 2nd floor. The walls needed repainting. The carpet was stained. The window air conditioning unit rattled and barely worked. None of that mattered now. I grabbed my phone, an old model I barely remembered owning, and checked the date. May 15th. My licensing exam results would be posted online tomorrow morning. I already knew I'd passed. I remembered the elation I'd felt, rushing downstairs to tell Helen and Marcus, expecting them to be proud. Instead, Helen had smiled that calculating smile of hers and said, "How wonderful, dear. You know, Marcus has been thinking about starting his own construction company. Perhaps you two could work together." I'd been so naive, so desperate for approval from the woman who'd married my father when I was 8 and had spent the next 15 years making sure I knew I'd never be as important as her biological son. My father. I closed my eyes against the wave of grief and anger. Dad had died when I was 19. A construction accident on one of his job sites. He'd been a contractor too, had owned Chen & Associates Construction. It should have been mine. Instead, Helen had inherited everything as his widow, and within 6 months she'd run the company into the ground, sold off the assets, and pocketed the money. I'd believed her when she said the business had too much debt. I'd believed her when she said she'd put my share in a trust fund for me to access at 25. I'd believed so many lies. In my previous life, I'd let Marcus use my contractor's license to bid on jobs. He'd promised we'd be partners, that he'd handle the business side while I managed the projects. For 3 years, I'd worked 18-hour days on his construction sites while he schmoozed clients and made promises he never intended to keep. Then came the Riverside Commons project, the one that should have been our big break, a mixed-use development worth $30 million. Marcus had been so excited when he'd won the bid. I'd been on site every day for 8 months, trying to keep up with his impossible timeline, signing off on work I barely had time to inspect properly. The violations had been his fault. The shortcuts, the unlicensed subcontractors, the missing permits, all his decisions. But my license had been on the paperwork. When the inspector came, I'd been the one who lost everything. My license was suspended for 3 years. The fines had bankrupted me. Marcus had claimed ignorance, thrown me under the bus, and walked away to start fresh with a new contractor stupid enough to trust him. I'd spent the next 9 years working as a construction site administrator, never able to rebuild. Helen had watched it all happen with that satisfied smile, never once offering to help her stepdaughter while her precious son went on to build his empire on the backs of others. But the worst part, the part that had haunted me as I lay dying, I'd let it happen. I'd been so desperate to be part of a family, to be valued, that I'd ignored every red flag. I'd given them power over me, and they'd used it to destroy me. Not this time. I got out of bed and went to my closet, so pushing aside the cheap clothes to find the box I'd hidden in the back. Inside was everything I'd kept from my father. His old project notebooks, his contractor's license, photographs from job sites. I pulled out the notebooks and started reading. Dad had been meticulous, every project documented, every lesson learned written down. He'd wanted me to follow in his footsteps, had started training me when I was 16. These notebooks were worth more than gold to me now, because I knew things this time. I knew which projects would fail and which would succeed. I knew which inspectors were honest and which could be bribed. I knew which suppliers would become the best in the region and which would go bankrupt. Most importantly, I knew exactly what Marcus was going to do, and I knew how to use it against him. The next morning, I checked my exam results. Passed, as expected. I took a screenshot and saved it to my cloud storage. I'd learned the hard way to document everything. Helen was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, drinking coffee and scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I entered. "Morning, Lily." "Morning, Helen." I poured myself coffee, keeping my voice neutral. "I passed my contractor's exam." Now she looked up and I saw the calculation flash across her face. In my previous life, I hadn't noticed it. Now I recognized it for what it was. She was already thinking about how to exploit me. "Congratulations, dear. That's wonderful news." She set down her phone, suddenly all warmth and attention. "You must be so proud. Your father would be proud too." The mention of my father made my jaw clench, but I forced a smile. "Thanks." "You know," Helen continued, right on schedule, "Marcus has been thinking about getting into construction. Maybe you two should talk about working together. Family businesses can be so successful." There it was. The trap being set, just like before. In my previous life, I jumped at the chance. This time, I knew better. "Actually, I've been thinking about that," I said carefully. "I want to build my own reputation first. Establish myself independently before I consider partnerships." Helen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, that seems a bit ambitious. The construction industry is very competitive, dear. Wouldn't it be better to have family support?" "I appreciate the concern, but I need to do this my way." I could see her recalculating, trying to find another angle. "Well, Marcus really has been talking about this. Maybe you could at least have a conversation with him. He has some very exciting ideas." "Sure," I said, knowing I couldn't refuse entirely without raising suspicion. "I'm happy to talk." Marcus came downstairs 20 minutes later, all charm and easy smiles. He was handsome in that conventional way that had always helped him get what he wanted. Tall, athletic build, dark hair perfectly styled. He'd always known how to work a room, how to make people like him. I'd fallen for it too, in my past life. I'd thought his interest in my career was genuine brotherly support. "Hey, Lil, Mom told me the good news. Congrats on passing." He pulled me into a hug that I forced myself to return. "We should celebrate. How about dinner tonight? My treat." "Thanks, Marcus. That's really nice of you." "So listen," he said, grabbing an apple from the counter. "I've been looking into the construction business. There's so much opportunity right now, and with your license, we could really build something amazing together. I pretended to consider this. What kind of work are you thinking about?" "Residential renovation to start, small projects to build a reputation. Then we move into commercial development." His eyes lit up with the same enthusiasm I remembered. It had seemed genuine once. Now I could see it was just practiced salesmanship. I've already got potential clients lined up, people I know from business school, connections Mom has made. We could have a full schedule within a month. That's really fast, I said. Don't you think we should plan this out more carefully? Come on, Lily. You can't be afraid to take risks in business. That's how fortunes are made. He bit into his apple, confident and relaxed. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Trust me. The same words he'd used before, over and over, every time he'd asked me to sign off on something questionable, to cut a corner, to look the other way. Let me think about it, I said. This is a big decision. I could see the flash of annoyance cross his face before he covered it with understanding. Of course. Take your time. But not too much time. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. That was a threat, subtle but clear. In my previous life, he'd used the same tactic repeatedly, creating artificial urgency to pressure me into bad decisions. Not anymore. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus kept up the pressure. Casual mentions of amazing opportunities were missing. Helen chiming in with comments about how families should support each other. Guilt trips about how I was being selfish, thinking only of myself. I played along just enough to keep them from getting suspicious, expressing interest while making excuses about needing time to set things up properly. Meanwhile, I was making my real preparations. First, I opened my own business account and business entity, Chen Construction Solutions, LLC. I filed all the paperwork properly, set up accounting systems, got insurance, everything by the book. Second, I started reaching out to the clients I remembered from my previous life. The ones who'd been happy with my work, who'd recommended me to others. I offered free consultations, positioning myself as a fresh talent eager to build a reputation on quality work. Third, and most importantly, I started documenting everything with Marcus and Helen, every conversation, every request, every pressure tactic. I recorded phone calls, legally. I made sure to check the state's one-party consent laws. I saved texts and emails. I was building a file. Because I knew what was coming. Marcus's impatience finally boiled over 3 weeks after I got my license. He cornered me in the kitchen one evening when Helen was out. Okay, Lily, what's really going on? His friendly mask had slipped, showing the irritation underneath. You keep saying you need time, but you're not actually doing anything. Are we doing this or not? I took a breath. This was the moment. In my previous life, I'd caved to his pressure. This time, I stood my ground. I've decided to build my own business, Marcus. I appreciate your interest, but I need to do this independently. His face darkened. Are you kidding me? After everything we've talked about? After all the opportunities I've lined up? I never agreed to anything, I said calmly. I said I'd think about it. I have. My answer is no. This is bullshit, Lily. He slammed his hand on the counter. You're being incredibly selfish. Family is supposed to help each other. Then help me build my own business, I suggested. Give me some of those client referrals for my company. He laughed, harsh and bitter. Right. So you can compete with me? I don't think so. So you're planning to start a construction company anyway, without a license? I'll find another contractor to work with. Someone who appreciates the opportunity. Good luck with that, I said, and walked away. I heard him call after me, anger in his voice, but I kept walking. My hands were shaking, but from adrenaline, not fear. I'd done it. I'd said no. As Helen confronted me the next morning. She'd clearly talked to Marcus, and she was furious in that cold, controlled way of hers. Lily, I'm very disappointed in you. I'm sorry you feel that way. Marcus told me you refused to work with him. After everything this family has done for you? I bit back the response I wanted to make, about how this family had done nothing but use me. How Helen had stolen my inheritance, how Marcus had never worked a day as hard as I had. Instead, I kept my voice level. I need to build my own career, Helen. I hope you can understand that. What I understand, she said icily, is that you're being ungrateful and short-sighted. Marcus has connections, opportunities. You have a piece of paper that says you passed a test. Do you really think that's enough? I guess we'll find out. Her eyes narrowed. Yes. I suppose we will. The temperature in the house dropped after that. Helen barely spoke to me except when necessary. Marcus ignored me entirely. I started eating meals in my room, spending as much time out of the house as possible while I built my business. It was lonely. It was uncomfortable. But I'd been through worse. I died alone and broke, remember? This was nothing. And then, 6 weeks after I'd refused Marcus's offer, everything changed. I came home to find Marcus in the living room with Helen, both of them smiling. Actual, genuine smiles. "Lily," Marcus called out. "Come here for a second." I approached cautiously. "What's up?" "I wanted you to know I found a partner. Remember Tom Richardson from business school? His sister just got her contractor's license too. Oh, we're starting Richardson Chen Construction." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. This was how it had happened in my previous life too. After I'd worked with Marcus for 3 years and lost my license, he'd partnered with Sandra Richardson, used her license for 2 more years, then dumped her too when a project went south. "Congratulations," I managed. "We're going to be direct competitors," Marcus continued, his smile sharp. "May the best company win." It was a declaration of war, and Helen's satisfied expression made it clear she approved. "I look forward to it," I said, matching his smile with one of my own, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that in 8 months, Marcus would win the bid for the Riverside Commons project. I knew he'd cut every corner possible to maximize profit. I knew he'd use unlicensed subcontractors, skip inspections, and forge documents. And this time, Sandra Richardson's license would be the one on all those forged documents. Sandra Richardson would be the one facing suspension and fines. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not completely, because I'd realized something important after I died. Lying in that hospital bed reviewing my failures. The reason Marcus had gotten away with destroying me was that I'd been alone. No allies, no backup, no one who cared enough to help when everything fell apart. This time, I was going to make sure Sandra had a way out. And in the process, I was going to make absolutely certain that Marcus's crimes were fully exposed. Underscore 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 underscore. I found Sandra Richardson's contact information easily enough. Marcus had mentioned where she worked in my previous life. She was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm, probably feeling overlooked and ready for a change. Perfect prey for Marcus's pitch. I called her on a Tuesday afternoon, introducing myself as a fellow new contractor looking to network. "Oh, you're Marcus Chen's sister," Sandra said, her voice friendly. "He's mentioned you, said you two were thinking about working together, but it didn't work out. Different visions for our careers," I said diplomatically, "but I'm actually calling because I wanted to give you some friendly advice, sister to sister in this industry." "Oh, what's that?" "Be very careful about licensing liability. When you partner with someone who isn't licensed, make absolutely sure you have clear documentation of every decision, every approval, every inspection. Cover your ass at all times." There was a pause. "That's oddly specific advice." "I know. But I've heard some horror stories. Unlicensed partners making decisions that the licensed contractor gets blamed for. I just wanted to make sure you protect yourself." "I appreciate that," Sandra said, and I could hear the wariness in her voice. Marcus seems very professional, though, very organized. "I'm sure he is," I said. "Just make sure everything's in writing, especially when it comes to inspections and permits. Don't sign off on anything you haven't personally verified." "Right. Of course. That's basic practice. You'd be surprised how often it doesn't happen when you're busy and your partner is pushing for speed." I paused. "Look, I know this seems weird, calling you out of the blue like this. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but I'd hate to see another woman in this industry get burned by trusting the wrong person." "Are you saying I shouldn't trust your brother?" "I'm saying trust, but verify. Always." We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I didn't know if she'd take my advice seriously, but I'd planted the seed. Even if she ended up working with Marcus and things went wrong, she'd remember this conversation. She'd know someone had tried to warn her. That was more than anyone had done for me. The next few months were a blur of work. I took on small residential projects, bathroom renovations, kitchen remodels, deck installations. Nothing glamorous, but I did quality work and I did it on time and on budget. My reputation started to build. I also started making strategic connections. I remembered which developers in the city were about to hit it big. Which ones were trustworthy? Which ones to avoid? I cultivated relationships, positioned myself as a reliable contractor who could be counted on for challenging projects. Most importantly, I started building relationships with inspectors and city officials, not through bribes or corruption, but through professionalism and competence. I made sure my work was always code compliant, my paperwork always perfect. When inspectors came to my sites, they found nothing to criticize. I was building something real, something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's mistakes. Meanwhile, Marcus and Sandra's company was growing fast. They were taking on bigger projects, underbidding competitors, promising impossible timelines. I watched from a distance, remembering how impressed I'd been by Marcus's aggressive business tactics in my previous life. Now I could see them for what they were: unsustainable shortcuts that would eventually collapse. Helen still barely spoke to me. Fine. I'd moved most of my things to a storage unit and was looking at apartments. The moment I had enough saved for first and last month's rent plus security deposit, I was gone. Marcus loved to brag about his success. Whenever we crossed paths at home, he'd make sure to mention his latest big contract, his growing crew, how much money he was making. "You could have been part of this, Lily," he said one evening, grinning smugly. "Instead, you're still doing bathroom remodels for middle-class homeowners." "Those middle-class homeowners are happy with my work," I replied. "Can your clients say the same?" His smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just that there's more to success than growth. Sustainability matters too." "Right, spoken like someone who's afraid to take risks." He shook his head. "You're going to regret playing it safe, Lily. In 5 years, I'll be running a development company and you'll still be installing toilets." I thought about where he'd actually be in 5 years in my original timeline, running another scam with another unlicensed contractor after Sandra's career burned out. The pattern would have continued, victim after victim, if I hadn't died and come back to stop it. "We'll see," I said. So 8 months after I'd refused to work with Marcus, I saw the public notice. The Riverside Commons project was going out for bid. My heart rate picked up. This was it. The project that had destroyed me in my previous life was about to destroy someone else, unless I intervened carefully. I knew Marcus would bid on it. In my past life, he'd been so excited about the opportunity, had called it his big break into commercial development. He'd underbid everyone by 15%, promising an impossible timeline to make up for his company's lack of experience in projects this large. And he'd deliver on that impossible timeline by cutting every corner possible. I pulled up the project specifications and started going through them. A mixed-use development, retail on the first floor, offices on the second and third, luxury apartments on the fourth and fifth. $30 million budget, 18-month timeline. It should have been a 24-month project at minimum, with a budget that allowed for proper oversight and no shortcuts. But the developers were trying to save money and get the building occupied faster. They'd written the specs in a way that invited contractors to promise more than they could deliver. Perfect bait for Marcus. I could bid on it myself, but I knew I wouldn't win. Not against Marcus's lowball numbers. And honestly, I didn't want this project. I remembered the stress of it, the impossible demands, the way it had consumed every moment of my life. No, my play here was different. I called Sandra Richardson again. We'd stayed in touch over the past few months, professional acquaintance more than friends. I'd continued to give her advice when she asked, and she'd started to trust me. "Sandra, I saw the Riverside Commons RFP. Are you guys bidding on it?" "Marcus is working on the bid now," she said. "It's a huge opportunity." "It's a huge risk," I corrected. "That timeline is impossible without cutting corners. And the penalty clauses if you miss deadlines are brutal. Marcus seems confident we can handle it." "I'm sure he is. But Sandra, seriously, if you take this project, you need to have ironclad documentation of every single decision. Get everything in writing. Every shortcut Marcus wants to take, make him put it in an email. Every time he tells you to skip an inspection, document it." There was a long pause. "Lily, why do you keep warning me about your brother?" I took a breath. This was the moment to decide how much to tell her. "No, because he's going to throw you under the bus the moment something goes wrong. And on a project like Riverside Commons, something will go wrong." "That's a serious accusation." "I know, and I can't prove it because it hasn't happened yet. But I'm telling you, protect yourself. Keep records. Make sure your license isn't the only one on the line when things fall apart. If you really think he's that untrustworthy, why don't you report him or something? Report him for what? He hasn't done anything wrong yet. I'm just telling you to be careful. Sandra was quiet for a long moment. I appreciate the concern, Lily, really. But Marcus and I are partners. I have to trust him. Trust him if you want, I said, but verify everything, please. After we hung up, I sat back and closed my eyes. I'd done what I could. The rest was up to Sandra. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move to make. I spent the next week putting together a detailed document. It outlined every code violation I remembered from the Riverside Commons project in my previous life. Every shortcut and every unlicensed subcontractor, every forged inspection report. I couldn't send this to anyone yet. The project hadn't even been awarded. But when the time came, I'd be ready. I also started having quiet conversations with inspectors I'd built relationships with. Nothing overt, just mentions that I'd heard Richardson Chen Construction was taking on a major project, that I hoped they'd do good work, but I'd heard concerns about their timelines being aggressive. Planting seeds, creating attention, making sure that when the project started, it would be watched more closely than normal. Marcus won the bid, of course. He came home that night drunk on champagne and success, loudly celebrating with Helen in the living room. I stayed in my room, listening to them toast to his brilliance, his business acumen, his inevitable rise to the top of the industry. The next morning, Marcus caught me in the kitchen, hungover but still riding high. "Did you hear?" he asked, pouring coffee with the shaky hands. "We won Riverside Commons. $30 million, Lily. This is the big time. Congratulations," I said neutrally. "You should have worked with me," he continued, his tone patronizing. "You could have been part of this. Instead, you'll be watching from the sidelines while I build an empire." I looked at him, really looked at him. At 30, in my previous life, he'd been exactly the same. Same arrogance, same assumption that he was smarter than everyone else. Same willingness to sacrifice anyone who got in his way. "I'll definitely be watching," I said. He didn't catch the edge in my voice, too caught up in his own victory. The Riverside Commons project broke ground 3 weeks later. I made a point of driving past the site every few days, watching the construction progress. It started well enough. Foundation work, properly permitted and inspected. But I knew it wouldn't last. 2 months in, I started hearing rumors. Subcontractors who weren't properly licensed. Inspections that seemed rushed. Materials that didn't quite match the specifications. Sandra called me one evening, her voice stressed. "Lily, I need advice." "What's wrong?" "It's the Riverside project. Marcus is pushing to move faster than the schedule allows. He wants to start framing before the foundation has been properly inspected on the north side. Says we can't wait another week for the inspector's schedule." "That's a huge red flag, Sandra. You can't skip foundation inspections." "I know. I told him that. He says we can do the inspection later, that it's just a formality anyway since we know the work is good." My pulse quickened. This was exactly how it had started in my previous life. "Sandra, listen to me very carefully. Do not let him skip that inspection. If you do, and there's any problem with that foundation, any settling, any cracking, anything, it's your license on the line. He's the managing partner. I can't just overrule him." "Yes, you can. You're the licensed contractor of record. You have final say on anything that affects code compliance. That's literally the law." "He'll be furious." "Better furious than losing your license," I said firmly. "Send him an email right now. Tell him you can't approve proceeding without the foundation inspection. Keep a copy of that email. Make sure it's in writing that you objected." "Okay," she said, her voice small. "Okay, I'll do it." "Good. And Sandra, this is going to keep happening. Every time Marcus wants to cut a corner, document your objection. Build a file. If this project goes south, you need proof that you tried to do things right." "You really think it's going to go that badly?" I thought about the suspension notice I'd received in my previous life, the 3 years without a license, the financial ruin. "I think Marcus cares more about his profit margin than your career. Protect yourself." She agreed and hung up. I immediately started drafting an anonymous tip to the state licensing board, not to send yet, just to have ready. The foundation inspection happened a week late and only after Sandra stood her ground. Marcus was reportedly furious, had yelled at her in front of the crew, but the inspection found a problem. improper rebar placement on the north side that had to be corrected before they could pour. If they'd skipped the inspection and poured anyway, it would have been a disaster. Sandra called me that night. "You were right. There was a problem. If we'd gone ahead, you did the right thing," I assured her. "Keep doing the right thing." But I knew Marcus wouldn't learn from this. He'd just get better at hiding his shortcuts. Over the next 4 months, the Riverside project descended into chaos. Marcus pushed harder and harder on the timeline, and Sandra fought him on every corner he wanted to cut. I stayed in touch with her, providing advice and moral support. Meanwhile, my own business was thriving. I'd landed a contract to renovate a historic building downtown. Tricky work that required expertise and patience. The building owner was impressed with my attention to detail and started referring me to other preservation projects. I'd also moved out of Helen's house finally. A small apartment, nothing fancy. But it was mine. Helen had barely acknowledged my departure. Marcus had made some snide comment about me not being able to afford anything better. I didn't care. I was free. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. "Lily, it's Sandra. I need your help." Her voice was panicked. "Marcus hired an electrical subcontractor who isn't licensed. I just found out. He did all the wiring on the 3rd floor last week while I was dealing with a problem at another site." "Did you sign off on any of the electrical work?" "No, I didn't even know it was happening. Marcus scheduled it without telling me?" "Good. Document that immediately. Send yourself an email with everything you know, date and time you found out, everything. Then send Marcus an email saying you can't approve that work for inspection and it needs to be done by a licensed electrician. The inspection is tomorrow, Lily. If we fail, we're weeks behind schedule. Then you fail the inspection. Better that than getting caught with unlicensed work that you signed off on. He's going to kill me." "He's going to try to make this your fault," I corrected. "Oh, dude, don't let him. Put everything in writing right now." She did. I know because she had forwarded me copies of the emails, her documentation of when she discovered the unlicensed work, her refusal to sign off on it, Marcus's angry response demanding that she be a team player. The electrical inspection failed. All the unlicensed work had to be torn out and redone. 2 weeks of delay, tens of thousands in additional costs. Marcus blamed Sandra publicly, telling the clients and other contractors that she dropped the ball on oversight, but Sandra had the emails proving otherwise. This was the pattern for the next 3 months. Marcus would try to cut a corner, Sandra would object and document it. Sometimes she'd win and sometimes she'd lose, and the project would fall further and further behind schedule. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and carefully controlled anticipation. It was happening. Marcus was digging his own grave exactly as I knew he would. But I needed to make sure he actually fell into it this time. The crisis point came in month 8 of the project. Sandra called me at 11 p.m. crying. "He forged my signature." Ice ran through my veins. "What?" "Marcus forged my signature on structural inspection documents. The load-bearing walls on the 3rd floor, he had them modified without proper engineering review. And then he forged my sign-off on the inspection reports. This was it. The violation that had destroyed my license in my previous life." "How do you know?" "The inspector came by today for the final frame inspection. He had questions about the structural modifications." I didn't know what he was talking about. When I looked at the documents, they had my signature, but I never signed them. I never even saw them. Sandra, listen to me very carefully. You need to tell the inspector exactly what you just told me, right now, before this goes any further. If I do that, the whole project could be shut down. Marcus will lose everything. The clients will sue. If you don't do it, you could lose your license, your career, everything you've worked for. She was sobbing now. I don't know what to do. He's my partner. This will destroy him. He forged your signature on legal documents. He's trying to destroy you. But, Sandra, I made my voice hard. I tried to warn you multiple times. You have to protect yourself now. Call that inspector first thing tomorrow morning. Tell him everything. Show him all the emails where you objected to shortcuts. Show him proof that you weren't even on site when those documents were supposedly signed. Prove that this wasn't you. What if no one believes me? They'll believe you if you come forward now. If you wait until the building fails an inspection or something worse happens, then you'll look complicit. Do it now, while you can still show you were trying to do things right. There was a long silence. Then, okay, I'll do it. Good. And Sandra, you might want to call a lawyer. She hung up. I sat in my apartment, my heart pounding. This was the moment. The moment everything would either come together or fall apart. I pulled up the anonymous tip I'd drafted months ago and updated it with everything I knew about the current state of the project. Then I sent it to the state licensing board from a burner email account. By morning, the machinery of justice would be in motion. The inspector shut down the Riverside Commons project the next day. I heard about it from my own industry contacts before it hit the news. Full work stoppage, immediate investigation, multiple code violations flagged for review. Marcus called me that evening. First time he'd initiated contact in months. Did you do this? His voice was shaking with rage. Do what? Don't play dumb, Lily. The licensing board, the inspector, all of it. This has you written all over it. I have no idea what you're talking about, Marcus. I've been busy with my own projects. You poisoned Sandra against me. You told her to report me. I told Sandra to protect her license. If you did things that needed reporting, that's on you. You little... He cut himself off, breathing hard. This is going to ruin me, you know that? The clients are threatening to sue, the investors are pulling out. I could lose everything. Then you shouldn't have forged someone's signature on legal documents, I said calmly, or hired unlicensed subcontractors, or cut all those corners trying to meet an impossible deadline. How did you... He stopped. You knew. You knew this whole time. I tried to warn you, Marcus, tried to tell you to be more careful, but you were too arrogant to listen. If I go down, I'm taking you with me. I'll tell everyone you were involved, that you helped me plan... Plan what? I interrupted. I never worked on your project, never signed a single document, never even visited the site. You're the one who forged Sandra's signature. You're the one who made all those decisions. I have nothing to do with any of this. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, could practically feel his rage through the phone. Mom's right about you, he finally said. You're vindictive and jealous. You can't stand to see me succeed. No, Marcus, I can't stand to see you succeed by destroying other people. There's a difference. He hung up on me. I set down my phone, hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The first domino had fallen. The investigation moved quickly. Sandra, armed with months of documented objections and proof that she'd tried to stop Marcus's corner cutting, was able to demonstrate that she'd been a victim of his fraud rather than a willing participant. Her license was flagged for review, but she wasn't suspended. Instead, she was put on probation and required to attend additional ethics training. More importantly, she was granted immunity in exchange for her full cooperation with the investigation into Marcus. Marcus, on the other hand, was looking at serious consequences. The state licensing board filed charges for contractor fraud, forgery, and multiple code violations. The city joined in with their own charges. The Riverside Commons investors filed a civil suit for breach of contract and fraud. And Helen? Helen was furious. She showed up at my apartment 3 days after the investigation began, pounding on my door until I opened it. You did this, she said, pushing past me into my living room. You destroyed your own brother. Marcus destroyed himself, I replied. I didn't forge any signatures. I didn't hire unlicensed workers. I didn't cut corners that put people's safety at risk. He's your family. You should have protected him, not betrayed him. I laughed, bitter and hard. Protected him? The way you protected me after Dad died? The way you stole my inheritance and ran Dad's company into the ground? That kind of protection? Her face went white, then red. I don't know what lies Marcus has been telling you. Marcus didn't tell me anything. I figured it out myself. Dad's company was profitable when he died. You said there were debts, but there weren't. You liquidated everything, pocketed the money, and told me you'd put my share in a trust fund that never existed. You ungrateful... No, I cut her off. I'm not ungrateful. I'm done. Done pretending we're a family. Done letting you and Marcus use me. Oh, done being the scapegoat for your failures. After everything I did for you, raising you after your mother died, giving you a home... You gave me the smallest bedroom and made sure I knew every day that I was less important than your real son. You used me as free labor and never once showed me genuine affection. You want gratitude? For what? Helen's hands were shaking. Marcus could go to prison because of you. Marcus could go to prison because he committed fraud, because he put people's lives at risk with shoddy construction, because he thought he was too smart to get caught. That's not on me. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of me, but of the future. Because if Marcus went down, she lost her meal ticket. Her golden boy who was supposed to take care of her forever. "You're just like your mother," she finally said, vicious and low. "Selfish and cold. Get out of my apartment, Helen. You'll regret this. When you're old and alone with no family, you'll regret destroying the people who cared about you." The people who cared about me? I stepped closer to her. "My father cared about me. He's dead. You and Marcus never cared about anyone but yourselves. Now get out before I call the police." She left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood in my living room, shaking with adrenaline and anger, and something that felt almost like grief. Not for Helen or Marcus, but for the family I'd wished I had. The family I'd spent so many years trying to be part of. That dream was dead now, had been dead long before I came back to life with my memories intact. Time to let it go. The legal proceedings took months, but I followed them closely. Marcus tried to claim that Sandra had been the one making all the decisions, that he'd trusted her expertise and she'd betrayed that trust. But Sandra's documented emails destroyed that defense. Every objection she'd raised, every time she'd warned about code violations, every instance where Marcus had overruled her, it was all there in writing. He tried to claim he hadn't known the subcontractors were unlicensed, but the investigators found emails where he'd specifically chosen cheaper, unlicensed workers to save money. He tried to claim the forged signatures were a misunderstanding, but a handwriting expert confirmed they weren't Sandra's signatures, and security camera footage showed Marcus alone in the office at the time the documents were supposedly signed. Every lie he told just made things worse. The state licensing board revoked his ability to ever work as a contractor in the state. The criminal charges resulted in a plea deal, 2 years in prison for fraud, suspended to probation with the condition that he make full restitution to the Riverside Commons investors. But the civil suit, that destroyed him financially. The investors wanted their money back, plus damages for the project delays and the cost of hiring a new contractor to fix all the code violations. The total came to $12 million. Marcus didn't have $12 million. He'd spent it on a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Fancy car, expensive apartment, trips and parties, and impressing people who didn't actually care about him. He declared bankruptcy, lost everything, ended up moving back in with Helen. So who was herself struggling now that her golden goose had been slaughtered? I didn't feel sorry for him. Meanwhile, my business was growing. The historic preservation project I'd completed got written up in a local architecture magazine. That led to more preservation work, which led to connections with developers who valued quality over speed. I hired my first employee, a young contractor fresh out of trade school who reminded me of myself at that age, eager and hardworking and terrified of making mistakes. I paid him well and trained him properly, teaching him not just the technical skills, but the business ethics that would protect his career. I moved to a better apartment, then eventually bought a small house. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned through honest work. Sandra and I stayed in touch. She'd managed to save her career and had started her own company, this time with no partners. We sometimes collaborated on larger projects, 2 women contractors in a male-dominated industry who'd learned hard lessons about trust and documentation. I thought about my previous life often, about dying at 35, broke and alone, full of regrets. This time would be different. 2 years after the Riverside Commons collapse, I was invited to speak at the State Contractors Association conference. They wanted me to talk about ethics and best practices in the industry. I stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of contractors, and told them Sandra's story. Not using her real name, of course, but the details were accurate. A young contractor who'd trusted a partner, who'd tried to do things right, so who'd nearly lost everything because someone else had been willing to commit fraud. The lesson here, I said, is simple. Document everything. Trust, but verify. And never let anyone put your license at risk for their profit. After my talk, several young contractors came up to thank me, to tell me about situations they were in that scared them, to ask for advice. I helped them all, every single one, because no one had helped me the first time around. As I was packing up my materials, an older man approached me. He had kind eyes and graying hair, and something about him seemed familiar. "Excellent presentation, Miss Chen," he said. "Very powerful message. Thank you." "I knew your father," he continued, "worked with him on several projects over the years. David was one of the best contractors I ever met. Honest, skilled, fair to his workers. You remind me of him." Tears pricked at my eyes unexpectedly. "Thank you. That means a lot." "He'd be proud of you," the man said. "The work you're doing, the reputation you're building, this is the legacy he wanted." After he left, I sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, composing myself. Dad would be proud. I was sure of it. I'd taken the gift of a second life and used it not just for revenge, but to build something real, to protect others the way I hadn't been protected, to create the kind of career my father had envisioned for me. The revenge had been necessary, stopping Marcus before he could hurt more people, making sure he faced consequences for his actions. But it wasn't enough on its own. The real victory was this: a successful business, a good reputation, a life built on my own terms. 3 years after my rebirth, I was hired for the biggest project of my career, a luxury hotel renovation in the historic district. $20 million budget, 18-month timeline, ambitious but achievable with proper planning and no shortcuts. The project went beautifully. We came in on time and under budget, with 0 code violations and glowing reviews from the owners. The local newspaper did a feature on the renovation, with a photo of me on the front page of the business section. The headline read, "Chen Construction Solutions, Building on a Legacy of Quality." I framed that newspaper article and hung it in my office, right next to a photo of my father on one of his job sites. Helen saw it, I heard. Marcus told someone who eventually mentioned it to me. Apparently, just Helen had seen the article and thrown the newspaper across the room in rage. Marcus, still living with her and working a series of minimum wage jobs because no construction company would hire him, had reportedly just stared at it silently. I didn't care about their reactions. They were no longer part of my life. 5 years after my rebirth, I hired a private investigator. "I need you to find out what happened to money from Chen and Associates Construction when it was liquidated after my father's death," I told him. "I believe my stepmother embezzled a significant amount that should have been part of my inheritance." "That was a long time ago," the investigator said. "Records might be hard to find." "I have my father's old business documents," I said, pulling out the notebooks I'd saved. "His accounts, his contracts, his client lists. Everything we need to prove the company was profitable." It took 6 months, but the investigator found everything. Helen had indeed embezzled my inheritance, nearly $2 million that should have been held in trust for me. She'd hidden it in offshore accounts, used shell companies to obscure the trail, thought she'd gotten away with it. I filed suit, Helen hired lawyers, tried to claim the money had been legitimately hers, that Dad's business had been in debt just as she'd always said. But I had the evidence, Dad's meticulous records, the investigator's findings, proof of the offshore accounts. The judge ruled in my favor. Helen was ordered to repay the full amount plus interest and penalties, nearly $3 million total. She didn't have it. She'd spent most of it over the years, funding Marcus's failed ventures and her own comfortable lifestyle. So she lost her house, lost her savings, lost everything just like she'd made me lose everything in my previous life. The money I won went into a trust fund, a real one this time. I didn't need it for my business, which was doing well enough on its own. Instead, I set it up as a scholarship fund for young people pursuing careers in construction and trade skills. The David Chen Memorial Scholarship, named after my father. Every year, I personally selected the recipients. I looked for kids who reminded me of myself, hungry for success, willing to work hard, maybe coming from difficult family situations where they weren't fully supported. I gave them what I'd never had: financial support, mentorship, and someone who believed in their potential. That felt better than any revenge ever could. 7 years after my rebirth, I got an unexpected phone call. "Miss Chen, this is Riverside Commons Development. We're finally moving forward with completing the project, and we'd like to invite you to bid on the work." I'd known this call would come eventually. The building had sat half-finished for years while lawsuits were settled and new investors were found. Now, someone had finally taken on the challenge of completing it. "I appreciate the invitation," I said. "Can I ask why you're reaching out to me specifically?" "Your reputation in the industry is excellent," the caller said. "We need someone who does quality work and won't cut corners. After what happened with the previous contractor, we're being very selective." I smiled. "I'd be happy to submit a bid." The irony wasn't lost on me. The project that had destroyed me in my previous life was now being offered to me as an opportunity because I'd built a reputation for integrity. I put together a bid that was fair, not the lowest price, but a realistic budget with a realistic timeline. I included detailed plans for fixing all the code violations from Marcus's shoddy work. I was honest about the challenges and clear about my approach. I won the contract. Standing on that job site on the first day, looking at the partially completed building that had once represented my worst nightmare, I felt something unexpected. Hope. This was my chance to prove that construction could be done right, that you didn't have to sacrifice quality or safety for profit, that a woman contractor could succeed in this industry through skill and integrity rather than manipulation and fraud. The project took 20 months, longer than the original timeline Marcus had promised, but we delivered a building that was solid, safe, and beautiful. Every inspection passed on the first try. Every subcontractor was properly licensed and fairly paid. Every deadline we set was met or beaten. The developers were thrilled. They asked me to bid on their next project and the one after that. Riverside Commons became a showcase for my company's work, a symbol of redemption. Not just mine, but the building's itself, transformed from a monument to greed and shortcuts into an example of quality construction. 10 years after my rebirth, I opened a second office and hired 20 employees. Chen Construction Solutions was no longer a small operation. We were a mid-size firm with a reputation as one of the best in the state. I was invited to join the State Contractors Association board. I accepted and used my position to advocate for stronger licensing requirements and better protections for contractors who reported fraud. I'd built exactly the kind of company my father had envisioned, the kind of legacy he'd wanted to leave. And Marcus? I heard updates occasionally through industry gossip. He'd moved to another state, tried to start over, but his reputation followed him. No one would work with him. No one would trust him. He bounced from job to job, never able to get traction. Helen had moved with him, the two of them trapped together in their bitterness and failure. I heard she blamed me for everything, spent her days nursing grievances and telling anyone who'd listen about her terrible stepdaughter who'd destroyed her perfect son. I didn't care. Gee, they were ghosts from a past life, irrelevant to my future. 12 years after my rebirth, I met David at a construction industry charity event. He was an architect, brilliant and kind, with no connection to my past trauma. We talked for hours about design philosophy and building codes, and our shared love of historic preservation. He asked me out. I said yes. 6 months later, he proposed. I said yes to that too. We got married in a small ceremony with my chosen family, my employees, my friends from the industry, the scholarship recipients who'd become like younger siblings to me. Sandra was my maid of honor. Helen and Marcus were not invited. On my wedding day, I thought about my previous life, about dying alone, full of regrets, wondering what I could have done differently. I'd gotten that chance. I'd done everything differently, and I'd won. 15 years after my rebirth, I sold Chen Construction Solutions for $40 million. I was 38 years old, wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined, respected in my industry, happily married, and ready for a new chapter. I kept the scholarship fund running, expanded it actually, now that I had the resources to help even more young people. I started a consulting business, helping other small contractors build sustainable practices and avoid the pitfalls that had once destroyed me. And I wrote a book, Building on Solid Ground, Ethics and Sustainability in Construction. It became required reading in several construction management programs. The book included a chapter on the dangers of licensing fraud, using Marcus's case, anonymized, as a cautionary tale. Every time someone read that chapter and decided to protect their license instead of trusting the wrong partner, I considered it another small victory. 20 years after my rebirth, I got news that Helen had died. I didn't go to the funeral. I sent flowers, a polite gesture, nothing more. Marcus called me the day after the funeral. First time we'd spoken in 18 years. "She never stopped hating you," he said. His voice sounded tired, defeated. "Even at the end, she was angry about what you did to us." "What I did to you," I almost laughed. "Marcus, you forged someone's signature. You hired unlicensed workers. You put people's lives at risk for profit. I didn't do any of that. You could have helped me, could have covered for me. We were family." "No," I said quietly. "Family doesn't destroy each other for personal gain. Today, family doesn't steal inheritances or use each other as scapegoats. You and Helen weren't my family. You were predators who saw me as prey. Silence on the other end of the line. Do you know what the worst part is? Marcus finally said. You were right. About everything. I could have done things properly, built something real. Instead, I took shortcuts and lost everything. And I can't even blame you anymore because I know it was my own fault. That's the first honest thing I've heard you say in 20 years. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for all of it. I thought about my previous life, about forgiving him then when he'd offered hollow apologies designed to manipulate rather than make amends, about how that forgiveness had only led to more betrayal. Thank you for saying that, I said, but it doesn't change anything. Goodbye. Marcus. I hung up and blocked his number. Some wounds don't need to heal. Some people don't deserve second chances, even when they ask for them. I'd given myself a second chance. That was enough. 25 years after my rebirth, I was invited to give the keynote address at the State Contractors Association annual conference. I stood on that stage, the same stage where I'd spoken 23 years earlier about ethics and documentation, and looked out at a sea of faces. Young contractors starting their careers, established professionals looking to stay current, industry veterans who'd seen it all. When I was 23, I made a choice that changed my life. I chose to build my career on integrity rather than shortcuts, to value quality over speed, to protect my license rather than trust the wrong people. I paused, thinking about my previous life, about the different choice I'd made then. That choice wasn't easy. It cost me relationships. It meant turning down opportunities that seemed lucrative. It meant watching other people appear to succeed while I built slowly and carefully. But 25 years later, I can tell you it was the right choice, because the people who took those shortcuts, most of them are gone now, out of the industry or in prison or working minimum wage jobs because no one will trust them. Meanwhile, the contractors who did things right, we're still here, still building, still creating things that will last long after we're gone. I looked out at all those faces and saw myself at 23, at the crossroads, choosing which path to take. So my advice to you is this. Build on solid ground. Take the time to do things right. Protect your license and your reputation as fiercely as you'd protect your family. Document everything. Trust, but verify. And never, ever compromise your integrity for someone else's profit. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25, with anxious eyes and a contractor's license so new it probably still smelled like fresh ink. Miss Chen, she said nervously, I need advice. My brother wants me to work with him on a project, but some of the things he's asking me to do don't seem right. He says I'm being too cautious, that I need to trust him, but I smiled and put a hand on her shoulder. Tell me everything, I said, and then I'll tell you exactly what you need to do to protect yourself. Because that's what I did now. I protected people the way I hadn't been protected. I shared the hard-won wisdom from living 2 lifetimes. I made sure that the mistakes I'd made, the trust I'd given to people who didn't deserve it, the boundaries I'd failed to set, the voice I'd failed to use, didn't have to be repeated by the next generation. I died for the second time at the age of 93, surrounded by people who loved me. My husband David held my hand. My daughter, a civil engineer who'd followed in my footsteps in her own way, sat on the other side of the bed. My grandchildren were there too, along with friends and colleagues who'd become family over the decades. I'd lived a long, full, successful life. I'd built things that mattered. I'd helped people. I'd made a difference. In my previous life, I died with regrets. This time, I died at peace. As my eyes closed for the last time, I thought about that moment 20 years after my rebirth, standing on the Riverside Commons job site, about to transform a symbol of my failure into a symbol of my success. I thought about Marcus's face when the inspector had confronted us in my previous life, the way he'd thrown me under the bus without hesitation. I thought about Helen's cold satisfaction as she'd watched my career burn. And I thought about how I'd taken all of that pain, all of that betrayal, and used it to build something better. Revenge had been satisfying, yes. Watching them lose everything they'd stolen from me, seeing justice finally served, that had felt good. But the real victory wasn't their defeat. It was my success. It was the life I'd built, the people I'd helped, the legacy I'd created. It was dying surrounded by love instead of dying alone. That was the revenge they could never take away from me. I'd won by living well. And as darkness claimed me for the second and final time, I smiled, because this time I had no regrets.
Hi, this is me. Congrats on first. Hi, dear. Hi, McButt. Hi, Kaylee. Hi, Grave. Hi, Omerta. Mustard Omerta? Yo, mofo. Mustard Omerta? Speak on that, please. I'm distressed. Tamu! Oh my god. 13 months. Hi, Tamuo. Also, Mayhem, thank you so much for the freaking birthday gift to Camille. And Camille, happy birthday. What the hell? Hi, everybody. We got some big stinkers in chat. I don't mean to diminish or minimize your stinkerhood. That sounds disgusting. I don't want to minimize how stinky you are. So if you're a big stinker, wear it loud and proud, I say. Hi, friends. How's everybody doing? What's everyone's plans for Big Bad Discord? Yeah, I don't know about this new Discord business. Armpit was given the heads up and I don't like it. Hi, friends. You guys. How's everybody doing? How's your Tuesday? McButt has found the new emotes. Top stinker over here reporting for duty. Cocks and tits and cocks and tits and cocks and tits and cocks and tits. Thank you, Clam. Exactly. Oh, Doe Eyes, I miss you. How are you? Nice to see you. Hi, friends. Look at that. Vinny. Hi, Vinny. No one's done it yet. How loud was it? Do I need to turn it up? How did we do? No sound. I'll turn it higher. Let's see. I think it made a noise in my louder. It made a noise, but it was lower than the thing. Aww. So amazing, wonderful Vinny Vidi Vici has done something very cool, and we're growing a base of redeems for they're just little, you can pull up different artworks on the thing. Vinny's extremely good at making little stream things. Vinny's been doing an incredible job with the very wonderful Grubby Tinky Toot, who is widowy wife white now, I'm pretty sure. Grubby's amazing, and Vinny's been doing really cool stuff with Grubby. Have you cut your hair? No, I washed it and it was kind of frizzy, and so it's just in a big just in one big braid. A plait, as we would call it. Omerta, that's so much better. Thank you. Why did you do that? Oh, I hate it. Hi, J-Man. A lot of clothes you've got. Yeah, it's colder than I would like. It's the first day is... The braid is cute. Thank you, Seth. Oh, Seth. Change scary. Thank you, person. I'm actually growing out my hair from being like this short. I hated it. It's here. I took the return thing off so that I wouldn't dox your address. Showing it on stream. But you did say open it on stream, right? I specifically didn't open it yet. Aki, you changed to poop color? You did. Okay, and I'm nothing if not very obedient. This new point system, I think it just comes with, if as you watch stream, you just get points. You get points for however, just for watching. I was in a chat last night. Everyone's name was Red, so I changed mine. You're a menace. Happy 25 streams to week, and also with you, AC. I'm where you said, short and hate it. Growing out my hair too. Oh, Thank you, person. Yeah, it was a long time. Okay! How dare. Obedient lies. Sorry about all the tape. Okay. No, I'm a bit of a tape fiend. Because I just want to protect stuff as much as humanly possible. There we go. Oh, there we go. Items. Skunk, you're all over this. Yeah, same. I think it's better to be cautious. Would rock a side ship. And that, well, yeah, the problem with that is then as soon as, oh my God,